Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Pei Beis in Baba Basras. We learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Asum Asar Rashivya. So before we start the two dots, 5 lines down on Pei Beis and Aleph, let's remind ourselves of the Mishnah that we actually learned on Friday when yesterday's daf, Shabbos' daf, and the previous page Pei Aleph. Hakona Shnei Lonos. Hakona Shnei Lonos. If you buy 2 trees, you don't get the karka between them. Rav Meir disagrees. Rav Meir says kona karka, and we saw that Rav Akiva back about 10 blot ago also said that you get the karka between them. They're more makel. In other words, they're more makel in terms of the seller being more generous. Rav Meir says you do get the karka, but the general opinion of the rabbis is that you don't get the karka between them. And we're going to talk later on about, well, how much karka are we speaking about? But I'm talking about one tree over here, another tree a mile away, and another tree another mile away. Do I get all the land between the triangle there, between the 3 trees? No, not so simple. We'll come about that later. But first he tells you a general idea. If you buy 2 trees, you don't get the karka between them. However, if I bought 2 trees, you got to let me grow my trees, right? So Mishnah says, Igdilu, if the trees grew and the branches went out, and etc., Lo Yishapa, the owner cannot cut them down because so do the trees. You're entitled to the trees. You don't have the land, but you're entitled to the trees. But Olam and Ageza Shalo, anything that grows out of the stem, out of the trunk of the tree above ground, that belongs to the owner of the tree. I bought the tree, so if anything comes out of the trunk of the tree, I'm entitled to it. Let's say something grew out of the roots, came out of the roots, meaning out of the ground. You don't know exactly what's going on there, but if it grows out of the ground, that belongs to the mocher, to the seller, because he didn't give me any karka. I just sold you the trees. Anything that grows out of the ground belongs to me. If it comes out of the tree, then it goes to you. And of course, if the trees die out, you don't get any karka. Kana shlosha, that means I own the karka between them too. And now, let's say after a period of time, my trees really grew up and grew out, and they overhung the property of the seller, the one who said it to me. I own the karka between the trees, but if they grew out, they spread out. I don't own that area. So therefore, the owner of the field could cut it down. He said, listen, there's no photosynthesis over here on my land because your trees are overhanging my crops. Then he says then he could cut it down. Why? Because now the buyer owns his own karka. It's like if 2 people have a field, one on top of the other, next to each other, right? If my trees overhang yours, you're entitled to cut that part down. It's bothering your area. So now we're each owners. If I don't own any land, I just bought the trees. Okay, you got to let me grow my trees. I don't have any land, but if I have land, then that's it. Then my trees have to be in my land. If they overgrow your land, you're entitled to cut them down. So kana shalosh kana karka igdilu, if they overhung your property now, then the seller who owns the land adjacent to these trees is entitled to cut it down. Anything comes out of the trunk or out of the roots, because now the ground belongs to me. I'm the buyer. I'm Shimon. I bought it from Reuben, and I bought 3 trees. So I own the land too. So if it grows out of the tree or if it grows out of the ground, it's all mine. And if the trees die, fine, I still have that piece of land. I have a deed to that land. That was the basic idea that we saw in the Mishnah. We've quoted many times. Now in today's daf, the pay base from the 2 dots. Now we said over here, if it grows out of the trunk of the tree, then it belongs to the owner of the tree, whether he has land or not, whether he bought 1 or 2 trees or he bought 3 trees, whether he has land or not. If you grow out of the tree's mine. So how can you tell if it's from the trunk? What's from the roots? What's going on over here? Do we really know where it's coming from? Yeah, very simple. If it's exposed to the sun, it's not underground. You see it growing out of an area, out of the trunk, which is exposed to the sun. That's menagesa. That came out of the trunk tree. If it doesn't, if the source is not exposed to the sun, that means it came out of the ground. So Russian. Okay, that's all pretty simple, right? If it grows out of the tree, that means out of the part of the tree that's exposed to the sun. That means that it belongs to the owner of the tree, whether I bought 1, 2, or 3 trees. If it grows out of the ground, well, if I only bought 1 or 2 trees and I don't have the karka, it belongs to the seller, not to me. Says the Gemara, but there's a problem with this. Why aren't you concerned that maybe the ground, ground changes level sometimes? Sand is added on. You can have a torrential rain or something, or a tornado. And what was yesterday, let's say, at this level is now at this level of ground. So why aren't you concerned that maybe these trees, why aren't you concerned that the owner, let's say, he only owns 1 or 2 trees, he doesn't have the land. And you say if it grows out of the ground, out of the roots, belongs to the owner, to Reuben, to the seller, not to the buyer. But why aren't you concerned that maybe it'll grow out of the roots, it'll come out of the ground? But then if more land, if more earth covers up that whole area, it looks like it grew out of the tree. You see, you can say grew out of the tree. So, or the other way around. You sold me 3. You sold me 3 trees, not 1. Basically, I'm entitled to the ground too. Why aren't you concerned about this? Yeah, it grew originally out of the ground, and out of the ground, right? Out of the ground, I'm not entitled to the land, right? If it grew out of the roots, belongs to the seller, not to the buyer. Buyer aren't concerned that maybe it'll grow out of the ground, which means it belongs to the original owner, to the seller, Reuben. But now it's right next to my trees, and I'll say, listen, I bought 3 trees here. Or you said 1 tree. I bought 3 trees, right? You say you bought 1 tree. The seller says 1 tree. Well, look, there's 3 trees here right now. I bought 3 trees in the same area. In this area, I have 3 trees. Why aren't you concerned about that? This Rav Nachman, in other words, that's a legitimate concern. Rashbam says in the narrow line still, right? Anything's even if it's near the ground, as long as it's exposed to the sun, belongs to the buyer. The imkain, the seller might lose out. Maybe I only bought 1 tree. And the rabbi said anything comes out of the tree itself belongs to me. And it'll grow. A lot of earth will cover it up. In other words, there'll be like a little landslide or whatever, and a mudslide or an earth slide, whatever, and it'll cover it all up. The karka will be lifted out until it covers up the tree, the trunk of the tree. Part of it in the ground. It looked like 3 trees. There's some space there, like we're going to see. Like it has to be. In other words, it really grew out of the trees, but it looks like there's 3 trees there, not 1. We're going to have I'm entitled to the karka. In other words, you should say, how do you say that if you anything that came out of the trunk of the tree, right, belongs to the owner of the tree, right? And anything grows out of the ground belongs to let's say it belongs to the buyer. Anything grows out of the ground belongs to the seller. Okay, but why aren't you concerned that it's going to grow out of the tree, right? It's going to grow out of the tree, right? And but it's still my tree. It's still 1 tree. But why aren't you concerned that maybe earth will cover it up? There will be more earth, a mudslide or whatever, and will cover up. The ground will be higher now, and it looks like he has 3 trees, not 1 tree. Why aren't you concerned about that? So he says, it means this, that if anything grew out of the trunk of the tree, it doesn't mean, Stam, that the buyer's allowed to keep it, because you're concerned that the level of the ground will get higher later on, and it'll look like 3 trees. It'll say, a couple of years later, it'll say, look, I have 3 trees here, not 1, I bought 3. Who's going to remember what he bought if he didn't have it in writing? Means this. If anything grew out of the trunk of the tree, the buyer's entitled to it, but he should cut it down. And anything grew out of the trunk of the tree, you're entitled to cut it down for firewood. You can keep it. But you can't let it stay there, because this takala, this problem may come up later on. There might be an issue over here, because if you have, let's picture one tall tree, and 2 branches came out of the trunk, and after a period of time, the ground covered it all up, and it looked like 3 trees. So therefore, Nachman says yakus. It means you can cut it down. It doesn't mean you can take it.
Because the original owner could start cutting down the branches that are blocking his branch.
No, if you don't know, we're talking about if he only has 1 or 2 trees, He only has one or two trees. We're talking about he only has one or two trees. He bought, let's say, up to 2 trees. So he doesn't get the ground. In that case, the seller is not allowed to cut down the branches. Yeah.
But if something grows out of the
trunk
of the tree
that he bought, yeah. Right. Oh, then yeah, but he also loses. They got to cut it down, but he gains because he has the land. That's bigger. That's worth more. Okay, so that's the thing. Rashbam says at the first of the narrow lines, at first of the wide lines, you can't leave it like the you can't let it grow because you might have this problem. It'll look like 3 trees. If you cut it down and use it for firewood. Okay, back in the Gemara. Rav Nachman, halfway down on Amud Aleph, Rav Nachman. Naktinon, we have a tradition. Dekel ein lo gezer. Now, we're talking about trees here. The Mishnah says ilanot. Ilanot means all kinds of trees. Ilan is a general word for all kinds of trees. We had the other day different rules applied to different kinds of trees because some trees, when they dry up the top, you can cut them and they'll regrow. They'll rejuvenate itself. However, we did say the other day that when it comes to a dekel, a palm tree, or a rosin cedars, not all kinds of cedars, because we said there's many kinds of cedars, right? We said putney is really pistachios, all kinds of cedars. But in general, he says palm trees and cedar trees do not regenerate themselves. So Amr Rav Nachman said like that. We have a couple of dekel ein lo geza. You know what? This business apparently means this. It says a palm tree doesn't have a trunk. What do you mean doesn't have a trunk? So Rav Meir ein lo geza lebal hadekel means this. Anything that grows out of the person who bought the palm tree, he's not entitled to that. Why? Since we said before that a dekel tree does not rejuvenate itself, once it dies out, you're going to dig it up and just take out the roots and just use it for firewood. In other words, our Mishnah said that anything grows out of the trunk, the buyer's entitled to. You can cut it down and use it for firewood. It's not in the case of a dekel. That's what Abzid meant to say. Meaning, since he gave up on it because it's not going to rejuvenate itself. He's not expecting anything to grow out of the trunk. Even if something would, he gave up on it because he doesn't expect anything to grow out of the trunk of the tree. The tree is just the way it is. That's how it is with a dekel, with a palm tree. And if you look at palm trees today, it is pretty much that way. It just goes straight up, and at the top, the leaves come out. Other trees have all kinds of stuff sticking out of it. So he said,
palm trees you cut off all around, and as long as you leave one sector piece,
it's going to keep growing up. Yeah, but it doesn't grow out. Branches don't grow out of straight up. Go straight up. So that's what he says. He says, Amr Nachman, 19, we have like a dekel ein lo gezer. Now, what do you mean to say? Some Rav said, L'meimer ein lo gezer l'bal dekel. That if something does grow out of the palm tree, if something would, as we said, there's 3,000 species. Maybe there is a species that goes out. He gives up on it. Since he's not expecting it, he figures when this tree dries up, I'm gonna throw it out. I'm gonna dig it up and burn it. He gave up on it. He abandoned it in his mind. Papa says, what do you mean? We learned on Mishnah. If you buy 2 trees, you're not entitled to the karka. What happens when those trees die? That's it. You just dig them up and take the wood out. You're not entitled to plant again. That's also standing just to dig it up and root it out and take it home. Our Mishnah is talking about you buy 2 trees. You buy 2 trees, you don't get any karka, right? And what's the eventual situation of that going to be? When those trees die, that's nothing. You can't replant over there. You're just going to take it out. And still, if geza comes out of it, if something grows out of the tree, you're entitled to that wood. So you don't give up on it. In other words, you can't say just since because I'm not going to be able to keep these trees in perpetuity. If these trees die, I can't plant other ones in their place. And that's what Tzvid said. Since I'm going to lose this tree eventually, I give up on anything growing out of the trunk. That's where Tzvid understood this member to be of Rav Nachman. That a dekel ein lo gezer. Rav Nachman's words were simply a dekel, a palm tree. There is no rule about the gezer that you get to keep whatever grows out of the trunk. There is no such rule. Why? Rav Tzvid said because you're giving up on it. What do you mean? When you buy 2 trees, you should also give up on it because you're not going to be able to replant them if they die. And still we say, yesh lo gezer, if something grows out there. Elam Rav Papa says no. When Rav Nachman said that we have a tradition, dekel ein lo gezer lebal dekel, the owner doesn't get it if he shein moksi gezer. You know what? He's just telling you that physically, a palm tree, if you have a palm tree, there is no rule about something sticking out of if something grows out of the trunk, because nothing does. As we see, the palm trees just go straight up. Rashbam says, take a look at Rashbam halfway down in the wide lines. At the top, it grows out, all its branches come out at the top, and it doesn't grow out of the trunk. That's why you got to climb up with a rope, etc., and that's why you give up on it. That meaning you give up on it because there's not going to be anything growing out of it. In fact, it doesn't grow anything out of the trunk. Says the Gemara, okay, that's a Rav Papa. So Rav Papa agrees. They both agree. Rav Papa and Rav Zid both agree in Rav Nachman's memory. And Nachman said, and he was supposed to say that Degel Ein Lo Geza. If you have a palm tree, other trees, Ilano, have when it grows out of the trunk, the purchaser gets to keep that wood. That's how he said, the purchaser gets to keep the wood. But if a Dekel tree, then he doesn't get anything. Why? Because he gives up on it. Why does he give up on it? Because it's going to be uprooted anyway eventually. That's what Rav Zvid thought. Rav Papa said, what do you mean? That when you buy two regular trees, you're also going to give up on it eventually, and yet you still get the Geza. Elamai means this. There is no Geza. Nothing grows out of the trunk of a Dekel tree. So Rav Zvid Kashma Season, what does Rav Zvid do with our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says, Rav Zvid says the reason why you don't get anything out, not just because it doesn't physically grow out, simply because you give up on it. So why in our Mishnah don't you give up on it when you bought two trees and you're still entitled to what grows out of the trunk? Rav Zvid Kashma Season, Kasha, and so Masnisen, the Zavan L'chamishanim. So our Mishnah is speaking about a case where you didn't buy the tree. You bought the use of the tree that grows on this ground for 5 years. In that case, even if a tree dies after 2 years, you're entitled to 5 years of tree service. You bought 5 years of fruits, let's say, right? You bought it. Say you bought the land with the tree that's growing on that land. I bought the tree for its use. We always have the problem that only Rav Meir holds that you can knock double shalom. I can't just buy fruits. I have fruits that are going to grow. Fruits aren't here right now, so double shalom. I buy the tree for its fruits. I buy the issue, the output of what's going to come out of that tree. So if I buy it for 5 years, I'm entitled to whatever's going to grow out of that tree for 5 years. And if that tree dies after a year or 2 or 3, the owner is responsible to put another tree there because I bought 5 years of produce. Can't say a tree's gone. I bought 5 years. So in that case, he doesn't give up. And according to Rav Zvid, the reason why he doesn't get what grows out of the trunk of a dekel is because he gives up on it. But our Mishnah is speaking about he didn't give up on it because he didn't just buy the tree. He bought 5 years of tree issue of fruits. Says the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom of Pei Beis and off 2 dots. So he said, if kana shlosha, kana karka. Right? You bought 3 trees, you get the karka with it. How much? Comma. How much you get the karka with it too, right? You get the karka, let's say, we're not even discussing yet how much space is between the 3 trees. Remember, the 3 trees could be in a triangle, they could be in a straight line, right? But I get the karka between the trees, that's for sure. How far does that go? Comma, how far? How much do you get? So Rav Barabba says, remember that name because we're going to come back to him. We're going to proof this, bring a proof to him later on. Rav Barabba, Rav Yochanan, you acquire the land underneath the tree. As far as the tree grows, underneath there. Ubeinan, between the 3 trees. The land, and outside of the trees, how far? Kumlo or basalo, as far as the harvester, the gatherer, the one who gathers the fruits of the tree, has to walk with his basket. In other words, they used to do things by hand, right? They would pick it by hand. So as much room as he needs to walk around there, let's say a yard or a meter or whatever, as long as that's the area that he's entitled to. So if you bought 3 trees, you get the land underneath the tree. As we said, if the tree dies, you can plant another one there. But how much land do you get? You get the area underneath the tree and the area between the trees, and you get the area around the tree, even outside the tree, enough to pick it. What's the point of having the tree if I can't pick the tree because I can't get to the outside? I can't get to the outside fruits. So that's how far you go. Ora is the gatherer. Rashbam tells us in the 4th line over here. 4th line of Rashbam on the left side. Ora shachman v'teinim. Here, ora is the word of a harvester, a gatherer of figs. When it comes to boats, when it comes to grapes, the word is botzer. But kotzer b'tvur. When it comes to crops, it's cutting them down, harvesting. But go to tomorrow. When it comes to dates, the word is go there. Umosik bezesim. When it comes to olives, the word is mosek. Umalaka b'shas. Other trees are called malaka. Those are all words for harvesting or gathering the fruits. Okay. Now Maskav Rav Lezer on the top line. Rav Lezer on the top line of the page in the Gemara. Maskav Rav Lezer. Hashda darch ein lo. Right, and he skips the next 7 words. It's like otherwise it's repetitive. What do you mean? He doesn't even have a path to get there. This is somebody else's land, right? Whose land is it? The seller. I sold you 3 trees. The buyer got 3 trees, right? And the buyer is entitled to the land underneath the trees and between the trees. And now you say he's also entitled to enough room outside the trees to be able to gather the fruits. He doesn't understand. How is he even going to get to his land? I've sold you, the seller sold 3 trees in the middle of his big, he's got 1,000 acres. He sold trees. How is he going to get there? The answer is, you got to buy that land. We paskin like the Rabbanan in this case, or the Rabbanan whole, let's assume. Let's go to the Rabbanan, that a mocher buying raw mocher. And therefore, when he sold him the 3 trees, okay, I sold you the 3 trees. Maybe you're entitled to the area between the 3 trees, right? But how are you going to get to your trees? You got a chopper, you got a masok, you have a helicopter. How are you going to get there? Okay, he's got to buy that too. That's not implicit in the transaction. If he said so specifically, I'm buying the rights, fine. You got to pay extra for that. You want a key with your car? You got to pay for that. Oh, yes, you can. It's not. That's the point. Rabbi Kiva says it's implied, right? Rabbi Kiva had before it's implied. Rabbi say it's not implied. So the Gemara says, Rabbi, I understand. He doesn't even. The purchaser doesn't even. Yes, he has the 3 trees. He doesn't even own the path to get to this tree. He wants to get those 3 trees. He can say, "Listen, fly, get a chopper. You want a path that costs more." Hasha derech lo. Why the arachrita? It's somebody else's land. That's the seller's land. This is the buyer's land. Or vasal leisha. You think he really has the rights to walk around the tree? He has that. That's he's entitled to. Take a look at Rashbam in the narrow lines, beginning of the narrow lines. Rabbi Elchanan do like derech chutz like Kamala Arvasaro to be able to go around like a Berosov. Hashem derech lo because of Shabbat Sadu Leil Kumasav. El Yifrak Bab's got to fly there. El Yifrak derech Mifal Karki Karabonon. Demachabas Lamar Mos de Amri coming Mocher Bar Bedus Ba'ayin Raw Mocher. Remember when he sold them the cistern? Not that I'm selling you the land that I'm keeping the cistern myself. I'm selling you a cistern in my land, right? A bore with water in my land. What do the rabbis say? I didn't sell you the path. You want a path that costs more. Rabbi Kiva says he sells him the path too. He's buying raw, buying yafa. Rabbanan say buying raw. So according to Rabbanan, buying raw mocher. So I sold you the 3 trees. How are you going to get there? So that was Rav Lezer's point to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said you get the land underneath it, between there, and around. We'll call that around the tree. You don't even have the land to get to the tree. Why are you giving the land around the tree? That was Rav Lezer's question. Amar Zera, Div Rabbeinu Nilmad. But you see this from what Rav Lezer said. What's the reason why I don't have a path? You see, when I buy 1 or 2 trees in your land, it's your land. It's in your land. How am I going to get to it? It's obvious that I'm going to get to. It's obvious that I have to get to the trees. You have to give me access to it because what did you sell me? You didn't sell me anything. But if you sold me 3 trees and I have the land, it's my land now. Your land. Your land is your land. His land is his land. You want to walk on the seller's land, you got to pay for that. So from Rav Zera says from Rabbeinu, from Rabbi Lezer's words, it says that why is it that I don't have the path to your land? Why? Because I have it's my land and your land. If Reuben lives here and Shimon lives there, each have their own land. If Shimon wants to walk on Reuben's land, he's got to pay for it. Okay, that's why he doesn't have any land. He says, but why? Because again, Rav Lezer said, since it's somebody else's land. You see from Rav Lezer's word that shlosha hudein lo derech. If I bought 3 trees and I own the land, that's why I have no path, because I have my land, you have yours. Hashnayim. But if I only bought 2 trees, I do have a path because I don't even have any land. That's the only way. What did I buy if I didn't buy the tree, right? I'm on your land. Of course I have to walk on your land. How else did you expect me to, what was the purpose of me buying a tree if I can't get to it? What was the purpose of me buying a tree? But if I buy land, I have land. That's my land, that's your land. That's how Rav Lezer understands it. That's how Rav Zera interprets Rav Lezer. I'm going to have Nachma Yitzchak L'Rava. Lamer Blaz lesser Shmuel Rabbe. Rabbi Lazar does not hold. Rabbi Lazar does not hold. This is what Rabbi Lazar does not hold of Shmuel, his own teacher. Wait a minute. Rav Shmuel holds that Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva said what? That if I sell you 3 trees and the land between it, I give you the path too. When I sell you trees, I give you the path. Mocher B'ayin Yafa. So Rabbi Lazar says over here, you don't have the derech. Doesn't hold like Shmuel, who paskin like Rabbi Kiva. Damer Mocher B'ayin Yafa Mocher. So l'chara, that's what he says. Amalei, no, it's not that he doesn't hold that way. Rabbi Lazar is explaining the Mishnah. The Mishnah said if you buy 3 trees, you get the land in between. How much land? Okay, underneath, between, and around. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. So according to that, he's asking this kasha. What do you mean? He doesn't even have the derech. How can he get the area around? He doesn't have the derech. You say that's not going according to Rabbi Kiva. The Mishnah is not Rabbi Kiva anyway. Why? The Amar Shmuel Chavi said Rabbi Lazar doesn't hold of his own teacher Shmuel, who paskin like Rabbi Kiva. The Mishnah can't be like Rabbi Kiva anyway. Our Mishnah is going to be why? Our Mishnah says that if it grows, right? That if I bought 2 trees, right? If I bought 3 trees, rather, if I bought 3 trees, and now my trees grow out and overhang the seller's property, sells allowed to cut it down because it's on his property line. He sells Rabbi Kiva because like Rabbi Kiva, Amayi Shafa. Why should he be able to cut it down? I sold you 3 trees. I'm generous. I give you the land underneath it, between it, around it, and anything that grows, you're entitled to all that. So l'chora, our Mishnah can't go like Rabbi Kiva anyway, because our Mishnah says you can cut down, the seller can cut down the buyer's overhanging fruits. Amalei, so he answered him, no, you can't say that. All right, so he says, no. Amalei, so who are Rav Nachman Yitzchak said this to Rava. L'chora Rav Lazar does not hold like Rabbi Kiva, because Rabbi Kiva says Mocher B'ayin Yafa. He says, no, our Mishnah can't go. He said, Rabbi answer, our Mishnah can't go like Rabbi Kiva anyway, because our Mishnah says that the seller can cut down the buyer's fruits. And if the seller sells B'ayin Yafa like Rabbi Kiva, he shouldn't be able to do that. Amalei, so he answered him. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak said to Rava, Eimadam Rabbi Kiva, when did Rabbi Kiva say that what you sell something generously? Rabbi Kiva said, if I sell you the cistern in my yard, you're entitled to the path there too. You know why? Because you're in my yard, you're not damaging anything. Eimadam Rabbi Kiva, when did Rabbi Kiva say? Right? When did Rabbi Kiva say that? Whereby if you sell a pit or a cistern, the lo makrishiara, because that's not damaging the land. In other words, saying not that my walking in is damaging it, the bore is not damaging the chutzner. Right? There's a bore there. The bore is not causing any damage to the chutzner. Then it's not a problem. But over here, by a tree, it is damaging. Your tree is overhanging my fruits, right? So I want to be able to cut it down. There he wasn't that generous. See, when I sell you the bor v'dus, so I sell you the bor v'dus, you're entitled to the path also there. And there, your bor is not damaging anything to me, so I'll be generous. But over here, when I sell you the trees, your trees are damaging my property when they overhang my property. Right? So where you don't find that? Says the and he goes on the Gemara. If 2 people are neighbors, Reuben and Shimon, and Reuben's tree overhangs Shimon's property, he said that if whatever I said, Reuben's trees are overhanging Shimon's property, Shimon's allowed to cut it down. How high? Like the top of the height of the ox goad, or the top of the stick that's on top of the plow. Meaning, Reuben and Shimon's properties are adjacent to one another, and Reuben's trees are overhanging Shimon's property. Shimon can't plow his property because the trees are an obstacle. When the guy's walking with the plow or with the oxen or whatever, and he has to hit the oxen, he's got what they call an ox goad, like a stick, right? And the plower is walking along. He's got to be able to hit the oxen. He's got to be able to use that stick. And if the trees are bothering him, you're allowed to cut that down. So Rabbi Kiva's motive to that too. So where did Rabbi Kiva say? Rabbi Kiva says, okay, if you have a bore there, if I sell you the bore is not damaging my property. I don't mind if you have a path there too. It's not causing any damage. But if I sell you trees and you own the property in between them, and your trees overhang my area, why should you be allowed to do it? So you can't prove from there that the Mishnah is not like a Bekiva, since the Mishnah says that the seller is entitled to cut down the overhanging fruits. Even Rabbi Kiva would be motive to that because it's damaging it's damaging the seller's property. That's what he says. Now Rashbam says, take a look at Rashbam in the third of the wide lines. He says the Milo Motor Bekiva that even if my tree is overhanging your tree, that you're allowed to cut it down. These trees are not planted in the seller's property, they're planted in the buyer's. The buyer has his own property there now. But maybe the Mishnah could go like a Bekiva. Shiur Dar V'Salma Isla Bekiva. Still, Rabbi Kiva does hold of that Shiur. Rabbi Kiva Derech Yeshlo Dumi Bar V'Dus. In other words, yeah, Rabbi Kiva could hold that the fact that the Mishnah says that the seller can cut down the buyer's fruits, that doesn't prove that he doesn't go like Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva might hold that too. Still, Rabbi Kiva would say that you get the area around it because he does say that buying Yafa. Rabbi Kiva Derech Yeshlo Dumi Bar V'Dus. In other words, according to Rabbi Kiva, when you sell the boar, you're entitled to the path. Why? Because I sell ba'ayin yafa. So here too, I should be entitled to the area around, so that the gatherer, the harvester, can get the stuff. The lo dami las god. It's not a big tree, it's not a big damage like a tree overhanging all my property. Just that area itself, under the area around the tree. Umiyu reisha. Rabbi goes on. In other words, and Rabbi does not know the Mishnah could go like Rabbi Kiva. So when he says that, when a blazer says, how can you give him the area around the tree? That's not going like Shmuel, like Rabbi Kiva, so he disagrees with his teacher. Umiyu Reisha, but the beginning of the mission, which says you bought two trees that they die, you're not entitled to karka, that doesn't go like Rabbi Kiva. We had this back 10 blot ago. In other words, from the fact that our Mishnah says that if you're entitled to 3 trees, the purchaser, and he has the karka there, and then the trees overhang the other guy's property, that the mocher can cut it down. Oh, doesn't Rabbi Kiva say mocher ba'ayin yafa? No, even Rabbi Kiva's motive there that your trees are damaging my property. So that the fact that the Mishnah says that that the seller can cut down the overhanging trees of the buyer does not prove that the Mishnah is not like Rabbi Kiva. People would say that too. Still, though, the Mishnah does not go like people for a different reason, because the Mishnah says that if you buy 2 trees, you don't get the karka. Rabbi Kiva holds you buy 2 trees, you do get the karka, like Rav Meir. So our Mishnah doesn't go like Rabbi Kiva, but you can't prove it from that point. So Rabbi Lazar could argue. In other words, the fact that he says that when Rabbi Lazar says you shouldn't be getting the area around the tree, the Ora Basalo, you shouldn't be getting that either. So he asks, what do you mean? Rabbi Kiva would say he does. Rabbi Kiva does say he does, but still the Mishnah is not really Rabbi Kiva anyway, so he can weasel out. In other words, that point that he shouldn't get the Orvasalo, that doesn't go like Rabbi Kiva. And if Rabbi Lazar holds like his own Rabbi Shmuel who holds like Rabbi Kiva, then Rabbi Lazar's point is not so well taken. However, if you understand that the Mishnah doesn't go like Rabbi Kiva anyway, so Rabbi Lazar could be explaining the Mishnah not like Rabbi Kiva, because the Mishnah is not really Rabbi Kiva. But you can't prove from the fact that the Mishnah says that the mocher can cut down the buyer's fruits, that it doesn't go like Rabbi Kiva, because Rabbi Kiva would hold to that. Rabbi Kiva says, if I sell you something at ba'ayin yafa, you're entitled to the path. You're entitled to the area around the tree. You're not only entitled to the area under the tree, between the trees, you're also entitled to the area around the tree for picking the fruits. But he wouldn't say that you're entitled to if you own the land, if the tree overhangs my property, the seller, he wouldn't say that you can't cut it down. I could cut it down because that's already damaging my property. Tani Kavasa in the middle of the Gemara. Tani Kavasa of Pia Baraba, Bryce of like Pia Baraba, who says this idea that you're entitled when you get 3 trees, you're entitled to the area underneath, between, and around the tree for picking. Tani Kavasa of Pia Baraba. Here the Bryce says the favorites like Rabbi Yochanan, or like Pia Baraba, who said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that if you buy 3 trees, you're entitled to the area underneath, between, and around the trees for picking. Okay, that area around the tree, right? I'm entitled to the area buyer. I'm entitled to the area underneath the tree, between the trees, and around the trees. Around the circumference of the trees, even the area is not mine. Who can plant that area? Who's entitled to plant the ground underneath that area, right? I'm entitled to walk on that area to pick my trees. But whose land am I on? Am I on my land or his land? The seller's right? Who can plant it? Who can plant underneath that area? So we see in a brisa. We already talked about this. There are two gardens, outer garden, inner garden. It was all belonged to one guy, and the outer garden guy sold the inner garden to Shimon. Reuben sold it to Shimon. How is Shimon supposed to get to his garden? So it says over there, okay, he's got to get the rights to get there. Okay, either he's give it to him, but who's entitled? He's entitled to walk on. He's entitled to walk there, but that path really belongs to the outer guy. So it says over there, what about planting on that path? They're gardens, right? You get to the inner garden, you got to go through the outer garden. Well, if you're walking on the garden, who's entitled to plant that area of the garden? The outer guy. It's his plant. So here too, the outer guy should have it. So meaning the seller, like you said, the seller should be entitled to plant the area underneath the picking area of the tree. Amalei, that's what he answered him. So Amalei, who's entitled to plant? Rav said the outer guy, the seller. Amalei, how can you compare to that case of the two gardens? Hasa, orchards, whatever you call that. Hasa, unless like say there's no loss to the purchaser. If I bought the inner garden, I have to walk through your outer garden to get there. Okay. Who's entitled to plant the path on the outer garden? The seller. Okay. There's no loss to the purchaser by the inner guy walking on that land. Avlach is like Seda. The gear says Labal Ha'ilan. Over here, there's a loss to the owner of the tree. Why? Here's a loss. What happened? I bought the trees, right? And I have the land underneath the trees, between the trees, and around the trees. But you're going to plant crops underneath my trees, and you plant crops, garden, and whatever you plant over there. There's mud. When my apples or whatever my tree is growing, if things fall down, they're going to get dirty on your land. If you cultivate that land, my stuff is going to get dirty. It's causing me damage. In the case where there's an inner garden and outer garden, the inner garden guy is walking on the outer guy's path, and he's not causing the inner guy any damage. The buyer is not losing anything, but over here the buyer's losing because he's entitled to the area around the tree, right, to pick his stuff. But if the outer guy, the seller, is going to plant stuff there, it's going to ruin his fruits when the fruits fall down. So you're soiling my fruits. This is coming to the safe. If let's say two people there's an inner garden and outer garden, and they both agree that they're going to have, let's say, an outside path. How am I going to get to the inner garden? On the outside path. That outside path is, so to speak, it's like no man's land. We both agree that it's a shared area, and nobody's allowed to plant there. So therefore, in this case too, nobody should be allowed to plant underneath the land. You could say that the buyer can't plant it because he didn't really buy that land. He just needs that land to be able to harvest his tree, to gather the stuff for his tree. But the outside guy, the seller, shouldn't be able to plant there either because it'll cause damage to the tree. A proof to what Abaye said, that you shouldn't be able to plant there. That area on the picking area, the area outside around the trees, nobody's allowed to plant there. That's what it's become. Now we get to the real big issue. When you say you're entitled to 3 trees, if you buy 3 trees, you're entitled to the area between them. So if I bought 1 tree in New York and 1 tree in Dakota and 1 tree in Florida, what am I entitled to the whole United States? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? How much land do we? What's the rules over here? The Kama Yeben, and how much area between them? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shmuel. So he says name is Shmuel Me'ara Amos Vat Shmona, from between 4 and 8 Amos. What do you mean between 4? If they're closer, it should be even more of a reason why I should get that land. That's not a field. Anything, if you plant 2 trees within 4 Amos of one another, one of those trees is going to be uprooted because they can't grow. You got to have room. Trees have to have room to grow for the roots, etc. So anything that's less than 4 Amos is like a forest. It's going to be uprooted. So if it's between 4 and 8 Amos, then you get that land. That means if, let's say, there are 20 Amos between the trees, you don't get the land between them. I'm selling you 3 trees. If they're 20 Amos apart, you're not going to get all that land. That doesn't make sense. So it says between 4 and 8 Amos, then you're entitled to the land. That's the first opinion. That's Rabbi Yosef from Yehuda Shmuel. Rav Amar Rav Nachman Shmuel. Now they all quoted the name of Shmuel, but it was either Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, or Rav Nachman Shmuel. Mishmona B'Ashay from 8 to 16. These numbers are lo ad b'chlal, says Rashbam. 4 to 8, not including 8, because 8 is already a different measure. But 4 to 8, meaning 4 up until 7.999 amos, is the first opinion. The second opinion is between 8 and 16. Amalei Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi turned to Rabbi Yosef, and he said, "Lo difficult at Rav Nachman. Don't argue with Rav Nachman's interpretation of Shmuel or his member Shmuel that he said between 8 16. The Tanam Asisi to us, we have a mission like him too. The Tanam, when you plant a vineyard, Tanam Teis a Kerem. Let's say you plant a Kerem, a vineyard, you're not entitled to have, it's climb. You can't plant, let's say wheat or some other crop, other grains with the Kerem, right? That's called climb. Rashbam brings out the halacha is lamaisa. You got to plant 3 trees to be over. You got to have 3 things. We hold that Rabbi Yoshia, the climb actually is that you're not really over until you plant 2 grains, 2 different kinds of grains, and vines together, right? You got to have all three together. But the Pashup shot is, if you have a vineyard, you can't plant grain there. Now, what's considered a vineyard? Let's say you have a row of a vineyard, a row of vines that are 16 amos apart. Remember, we said that 8 to 16 is not lo ad b'chlal, so it doesn't include the 16. If you plant them you have rows 16 amos apart. That's a long distance. An am is about 2 feet, right? So they're pretty far apart. That's not a vineyard. It's only if you have a loch of a vineyard you can't plant the grains in there. But if they're 16 amos apart, I have a big stretch of land, like miles and miles. But I made sure that I have a row of vines here, a row of vines here, a row of vines here. They're all parallel, but they're 16 amos apart. That's not a vineyard. And I can plant grain next to it. I can plant grain. It's not even a question of, is it going to grow together? That's not the issue. The issue is you can't plant grains in a vineyard. So that's you could bring other grains there too. You could bring other seeds there too. So what do you see? That it's 16. If you have 16 amas, then it's considered a separate area, right? So what Shmuel said, Shmuel said was 8 to 16 is considered close enough that it's all one field. If it's 16 apart, it's a separate field. And Rabbi Yehuda said, we have a story also. Story in Salmon, that place. The Echad Shanatas conversation says he did that. 16 amas. But what he did was, what he would do is this. Now it starts growing 16 amas, right? 16 amas, all the rows are 16 amas apart. When it starts growing, it doesn't go straight up in a perfect straight line like a ruler, right? It starts bending, right? Stuff starts growing. And so what he did was, to make sure that it was over 15 amas, let's say he had rows 1 and 2. They were 16 amas apart. And what he did was, when they started growing, he would turn over the stuff into each other. Now those areas not 16 amas apart. Now rows 3 and 4 were totally separate, right? Because the area between row 1 and 2, that was taken up by the vines. Between 2 and 3 was empty, because whatever grew on 2, he turned towards 1. And whatever grew on 3, he turned towards 4. So the area between 2 and 3 was totally empty. He said, that's okay. So you could plant between 2 and 3. Between rows 2 and 3, they're all parallel to one another. Shar means, Rashbam says that's the branches that are hanging over. 2 rows, every 2 rows, 1 and 2, he turned them to each other. And he would plant between 2 and 3. Then between 3 and 4, he would put those together, and he would plant between 4 and 5. Between 4 and 5. Now the next year, the next year, he would what the year that was between 1 and 2, he would now turn that between 2 and 3, and let's say between rows 0, let's say, and 1. In other words, what was full of vines one year, he emptied the next year, and what was empty the previous year, he turned those over. So this way he had alternating crops, and he was able to grow stuff. So and he planted the area that was uncultivated the previous year. The area that was uncultivated the previous year, which was what? Between between 1 and 2, where he had the vines growing, he didn't cultivate that land. Now he can cultivate it. And they allowed it. In other words, as long as there's 16 amas between each row of vines, you can plant in the area between them. Just make sure that you have a full 16 amas. If there were 16 amas between them and they started growing together, you can't plant there anymore, right? So you have to make sure that in between the first row and the second row, if you put the vines over there, then you can plant the area next to it between 2 and 3. And if you had the area between 3 and 4 vines growing there, you have to move over to the next one. So what do you see over here? You see a Misa like this. You see a Misa that you're entitled to do that. So Abaye said to Rabbi Yosef, don't argue with Rav Nachman and Amar Shmuel, because here you see that it's 16. 16 is the issue. If it's less than 16, that's not good. That means because it's the same field. So he answered him. So there was a story in that place, Dura Darusa, that village. It either had that name or it was a place of shepherds. He came from Rabbi Yoda. He said, listen, give him that area, like an area. How much area do you have to give him when they bought, let's say, 3 trees? How much area do you give him? As much as you need for the cow to walk around with its vessels, meaning enough to gather the stuff or plow around there. How much is that? How much is enough for the ox to walk around with its vessels, with its utensils, with all the appliances that he needs? He said, with all the accessories, to plow. He's keeping the Shamas later. I heard this mission. It says, don't plant a tree next to somebody else's land unless it's 4 amas away. Enough to work the vineyard. That's Amina Shmamina. That's 4 amas. That's all you need. You need 4 amas. You're telling me 16 amas is anything within 16 amas is considered the same field. Smash over here, 4 amas away is good enough. So that's our issue. Is it 4 to 8 or is it 8 to 16? This is more Rabbi Yosef Milatan. Do we learn a mission like Rabbi Yosef also? Rav Meir Shapiro, no tes karmo shmona amas shmona 8 amas by 8 amas. Then you're mutal havizer l'sham. You don't need 16 amas separation. If there's only 8 amas between them, that's considered a separate field, and you could put grain there. Afilochi ma'isa arav. Still, the ma'isa Talmud is better because there we saw that you needed 16, not 8. So it's fine. According to Rabbi Yosef, so we said Rabbi Yosef said that he brought this case that you have 4, and he brought Mufuzar and Hoda Amr, and then he said if it's 8 amas apart, that's good enough. With Sufin, if it's less than if it's less than 4 amas, not a kerem. Kerem is a kerem. Some kilo. If you have a kerem which is closer than 4 amas, the things together, it's Racham say it's a kerem because you could take out the ones in between. But if it's 4 amas, according to Rav Shimon, less than 4 amas is not, but 4 amas is a kerem. All you need is 4. So you see a minimum of 4, maximum of 8. The Chum say even if they're closer than 4, within 4 amas together, you can pretend the middle ones aren't there and still a kerem. Rav Shimon holds anything between 4 and 8 is a kerem. Right? Shimon says between 4 and 8 is a kerem. Rav Nachman, Rabbanim, Puzar, and Shemin, we see far away. You saw 16. Shemin, how do you know it's 8? According to Rabbanim, say you need 16. The maximum is 16 for a field. How do you know the minimum is 8? It's a svara, middle of Shimon Palga, Rabbanim, Nami Palga. Since according to Shimon, half of the maximum is the minimum, which is 4. According to Rabbanim, the maximum is 16. Probably the minimum is 8. But what's the halacha? Tomorrow we'll pick up from your Amar Rabbah in the middle of the page. We'll see what the halacha is. The halacha is we take the minimum of 1 and the maximum. We go between 4 and 16. Anything between 4 and 16 is a field. So if you bought 3 trees, and the 3 trees were a distance of 4 to 16 from one another, so you get the land between them. If it's more than 16 amas, you don't get the land. If it's less than 4, you don't get. It's not a soda because it's going to be uprooted. We'll see that halacha tomorrow, Mr. Shem. Have a good day, everybody. Shavua Tov.